You kissed her? I froze, glass trembling in my hand. Tears blurred my vision as betrayal burned hotter than the dinner flames I was about to unleash. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it's traveled. The first time I sensed the crack, I didn't even see it. It wasn't the words he said or the casual touch that lingered a second too long. It was the silence that pressed down on me afterward, heavy and suffocating, like a storm gathering in slow motion. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the knife in my hand slicing bread I couldn't taste, the sunlight cutting harshly across the room, and feeling that strange electric buzz at the back of my neck. Something was off. Always something. I told myself it was paranoia, a shadow of the insecurities I carried like a chain, rattling quietly beneath my ribs. But deep down, I knew. I always knew when someone I loved was bending truth around their fingers, twisting reality like it was soft clay. He walked in that evening humming a tune I didn't recognize, brushing past me with that familiar arrogance he wore like a second skin. And she was there, too, smiling too brightly, leaning into his shoulder just a second too long. My chest tightened. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was imagining it. Yet the memory etched itself onto my skin, a small burn I couldn't ignore. I found myself replaying that moment over and over, each replay sharpening the edges of my suspicion. The way her eyes flickered when she looked at him, the way he laughed, something hollow beneath the charm. It was almost imperceptible. Almost. Later, alone in the bedroom, I touched the photograph on the nightstand. Him and me, arms wrapped tightly around each other, smiles wide and false. My fingers lingered over the frame, and I felt the first rush of anger, bitter and cold. Not yet directed at anyone, not fully formed, but a spark nonetheless. I asked myself questions I didn't want answers to. Did he really love me, or had I been a placeholder? Did she know? Did she enjoy it? My chest tightened again, and I felt the heat of tears rising before I forced them down. Vulnerability was dangerous, a luxury I couldn't afford. I had to see clearly, and seeing clearly meant watching. So I began noticing things. The way he left the bathroom mirror fogged from her shampoo, the faint perfume that clung to his clothes like a signature of betrayal. Small details, insignificant, to anyone else, but screams in my world. And she was everywhere, woven into moments I had thought were private. Every laugh, every shared glance, every brush of a hand in the grocery aisle. Was it casual? Was it deliberate? I couldn't tell. But I knew I had to find out. I had to follow the trail, gather evidence, feed the fire that had started inside me. The fire of truth, of vengeance, of justice only I could mete out. And yet, I was careful. Careful to smile, to nod, to play the role of the unsuspecting wife. I had learned long ago that rage was dangerous if exposed too early. Let them see the calm, the wounded innocence. Let them think I am blind. Let them think I trust them. Every gesture, every laugh, every touch I gave him now was calculated, a mask over the simmering storm. And I could feel it building. One day, it would erupt. One day, the glass would shatter. And when it did, they wouldn't see it coming. Not her, not him, not anyone. Pause. I could still hear her laugh from that night, tinkling like glass, a sound I wanted to crush and preserve at the same time. That sound became my compass. I followed it, marking each small betrayal like footsteps in the snow. And each step I took brought me closer to knowing everything, to understanding how deep this crack ran. The next few weeks were a study in quiet observation. I moved through our home like a ghost, ears attuned to whispered conversations, eyes, catching glances that no one thought anyone would notice. I didn't confront, I didn't accuse. Confrontation was for fools, for the impulsive who didn't understand the power of patience. Instead, I cataloged, remembered, and waited. Every detail, every subtle sign of betrayal was a piece of the puzzle I was assembling in secret. It was at dinner one night that the first real confirmation arrived, subtle but undeniable. He reached across the table, not for my hand, but hers, brushing fingertips in a gesture so casual it should have meant nothing. But it meant everything. I froze mid-bite, the knife suspended above my plate, and felt a chill crawl up my spine. He didn't notice my gaze, or perhaps he did and didn't. Care? Either way, it didn't matter. I saw it all. I felt it all. And something in me shifted. Something that had been lying dormant, coiled and patient, awakened with a shiver of righteous fury. After that night, I became meticulous. I studied their patterns, noting the nights he left early, the meetings. She always seemed to have the way they shared jokes that had nothing to do with me. I questioned myself endlessly. Was I being paranoid? Or was I finally seeing the truth as it really was? The line between reality and suspicion blurred, but each day the evidence mounted. The faint smell of her perfume lingering on his collar, a text message glimpsed accidentally on his phone, the way she lingered in conversations that were never meant for her. Each small betrayal a thread in a tapestry that was growing darker and more tangled. And yet, even as anger flared, a part of me mourned. Mourning the version of myself who trusted, who believed in love without question, who thought our laughter and whispers were sacred. I mourned the life I thought we had built, shattered in quiet increments, each imperceptible to anyone who wasn't paying attention the way I was. I mourned the illusions I had nurtured, the warm evenings of shared smiles that had been slowly replaced by cold glances and half-lies. The sorrow and rage intertwined, a knot in my chest I couldn't untangle. Then came the day I realized it wasn't just betrayal. It was theater. They were performing a private drama, blind to my awareness, careless in their arrogance. And in that realization, something cold and precise began to take shape in my mind. Revenge, yes, but more than that. Revelation. They would be forced to confront what they thought I could never see. I would become the storm they didn't anticipate, the quiet reckoning that would expose every hidden truth. Every night I lay, awake imagining the moment of exposure, every sound in the dark magnified, the clink of glasses, the whisper of fabric, the subtle laugh that would trigger the unveiling. I felt the fire inside me grow hotter, coiling, waiting for the right instant to strike. Not with violence, but with a power they had underestimated. The power of seeing and being seen, of knowing and revealing. And in that quiet, I promised myself, I would not break. I would not falter. I would watch. I would wait. And when the moment came, everything would burn, not in flames of destruction, but in the undeniable light of truth. The weeks turned into months, each day a delicate balance between patience and fury. I became a master of pretense, the perfect wife in public, the silent observer in private. I smiled at him, laughed at his jokes, touched his arm when it seemed natural, but beneath it all, I was calculating. Every gesture I allowed, every word I let slip, was carefully measured. I was patient because patience was power, and I intended to wield it like a scalpel, precise and deadly in its subtlety. One evening, the tension snapped in a moment so ordinary it would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. He laughed at something she said, leaning back in his chair, completely unaware of the storm gathering in my eyes. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken and wine, the warm light of the chandelier casting shadows across their faces. Shadows, I realized, could hide everything, or reveal everything depending on how you looked at them. I saw it all, the way he admired her, the way she basked in his attention, the way my heart sank in slow, agonizing increments. And then I smiled. A quiet, knowing smile that no one would understand, least of all them. I began leaving small traces, subtle hints that I was not blind, that I had noticed, that I was fully aware of every secret. A misplaced glass here, a casual comment there, a glance that lingered too long, but always just out of reach of discovery. The fear it ignited in them, though faint, was delicious. They could sense something without knowing what. The way prey always senses a predator circling. And I felt the surge of satisfaction, that cold, controlled delight that only comes when the betrayed becomes the watcher, the silent architect of inevitability. At night, I wrote in my journal, not confessions, not plans, but observations. Every smile, every look, every word replayed in my mind with surgical precision. I dissected their movements, predicting next steps, imagining confrontations, and envisioning the perfect moment when the illusion would shatter. The power of foresight became intoxicating, more thrilling than any confrontation could ever be. I understood now that true revenge was not about violence. It was about patience, control, and revelation. It was the art of making them realize, without a single word from me, how exposed they truly were. And yet, for all the fury and precision, there were moments I could not control. Moments when memory struck, unbidden. Our first kiss, the warmth of his hand in mine, the laughter we shared before the cracks appeared. Those memories twisted my heart, made the fire burn hotter, sharper. Anger and grief mingled until I could barely tell where one ended and the other began. But even in those moments, I reminded myself, this was not weakness. This was preparation. Every pang of sorrow, every flash of memory, every heartbeat of rage was fueling the plan I had long ago begun to imagine. By the end of that part, the storm inside me had become almost tangible, coiling and thrashing against the confines of patience. I knew the moment would come soon when the glass would shatter, when the cracks would be revealed in a single, undeniable instant. And when it did, there would be no running, no hiding, no excuses. Only the truth, cold, bright, and impossible to deny. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence before the storm. And I waited, knowing everything, feeling everything, and preparing to act when the time was right. The night I caught him, truly caught him, I felt the room tilt beneath me, the air thick with betrayal so heavy it almost crushed me. The clink of wine glasses sounded like gunshots in my ears, sharp and relentless. He smiled at her across the table, that infuriating, careless smile I had once adored, and my stomach sank into a pit I didn't think existed. I wanted to speak, to scream, to shatter everything in that instant. But I didn't. I couldn't. There was a strange, exhilarating power in staying still, in pretending, in letting them believe they were untouchable. Every detail burned into me. The curve of her hand as she reached for her wine, the slight brush of her shoulder against his, the flicker in his eyes that betrayed a pleasure I had been denied. I could smell the faint sweetness of her perfume mixing with the rich red of his wine, the scent searing into my memory like a brand. I had imagined this moment 100 times, but imagining it and living it were entirely different. The anger rose in me, a slow, molten river, but I controlled it. Anger unleashed is wasteful. Restrained, it becomes an instrument of precision. Excused myself under the guise of needing air. Outside, the night pressed against me, the streetlights flickering over my hands, trembling slightly. I felt the first, sharp pang of something I hadn't felt in years. Fear. Not of them, not of the betrayal, but of the power I was beginning to wield, to confront, to expose, to reveal. That was intoxicating. And yet, the real thrill came in restraint, in knowing I could act and choosing exactly when and how. Every instinct screamed for revenge, but I had learned that true vengeance is a slow burn, a thing of calculation, patience, and timing. That night, I remembered the first time I had truly loved him, before cracks appeared, before shadows settled between us. The memory made my chest ache, bitter and sweet at the same time. But that ache only sharpened my resolve. Love without respect is hollow, and betrayal without consequence is unacceptable. I knew what I had to do. Not in violence, not in rash confrontation, but in revelation. Letting the truth speak in a way that could not be denied. Leaving them exposed, stripped bare before the world and themselves. Returning to the dining room, I carried myself like a woman untouched by what I had just seen, every movement measured, every smile practiced. They noticed nothing, but I noticed everything. Each laugh, each glance, each whispered word built the tapestry of evidence I had been quietly weaving for months. I was a silent witness to their carelessness, documenting it in my mind with a clarity that left me dizzy with purpose. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a plan began to crystallize. A plan that would ensure the betrayal would not just be acknowledged, but felt. Deeply. Indelibly, and then I caught her eye. For the briefest moment, she seemed to sense it. Not what I knew, but the shadow of the truth, the faint tremor beneath the calm surface. She smiled, unaware that she had stepped onto the edge of a precipice, and I smiled back, inwardly, cold, and controlled. The night was young, the stage set, and I held all the cards. Every instinct told me that the first move would be mine, and when it came, it would be devastating, not in fire or fury, but in exposure, in truth, in the undeniable realization that no lie could survive scrutiny forever. The days that followed were a study in subtlety. I watched them with a predator's patience, noting every laugh, every lingering glance, every careless touch. I didn't confront. I didn't react. Instead, I let them perform their little charade, oblivious that the eyes of the betrayed were on them, absorbing, analyzing, cataloging. Each day, my mind replayed the scene at dinner, the tilt of her head, the sparkle in his eyes, the way. My heart had plummeted, and I filed it away, every detail sharpening the contours of my plan. I began leaving traces, little breadcrumbs of awareness, just enough for them to sense something, but never enough to expose me. A casually placed glass where it shouldn't be, a fleeting glance, a sigh that hinted at the storm beneath the calm. They didn't know, but they felt it, the subtle pressure, the unspoken threat, and it was delicious. I had once thought revenge would be a roaring inferno, but now I knew it was quieter, slower, and infinitely more powerful. A whisper in the right ear, a flicker in the corner of the eye, and suddenly the world began to tremble beneath them. At night, I imagined the perfect moment of exposure. I played it over and over in my mind, their laughter frozen, the recognition dawning, the shock of knowing that the betrayed had seen it all. I imagined the heat of humiliation, the bitter taste of truth sinking in, the way they would stumble over lies they thought were invisible. Every scenario thrilled me, but I restrained myself, knowing that timing was everything. The wrong moment, the rash move, would ruin everything. Patience was my ally, control was my weapon, and yet, even in this calculated coldness, there were cracks of emotion. Memory would strike unbidden. The first time he had held me, the warmth of his lips, the illusions of safety I had believed. Those memories twisted my stomach, made my fingers itch with the urge to shake him awake, to demand justice in immediate terms. But I resisted. I understood now that true satisfaction comes not from confrontation, but from inevitability. From waiting until the truth reveals itself fully, until they can no longer deny what they have done. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the subtle shift in their behavior that told me the trap was closing. She lingered too long in conversation, and he glanced at her with something I had never seen before. A mix of guilt and desire, an acknowledgement that the walls I had built were visible. I caught it instantly, heart hammering, blood thrumming in my ears. It was all there. Arrogance, betrayal, and the faintest tremor of fear. And I smiled, inwardly, because I knew the storm was coming. And when it did, it would sweep away every lie they had constructed. The night of reckoning edged closer with every passing day, though no one suspected a thing. I moved through our home like a shadow, unseen but all-seeing, collecting evidence with the patience of a spider weaving a web. Every smile I offered, every casual touch, every quiet laugh I allowed him to witness was a thread in that web, invisible to them, but binding tighter and tighter. The thrill of control coursed through me, tempered by a simmering anger that refused to be quenched. I remembered the dinner vividly, the way the candlelight flickered over their faces, illuminating her smug expression and his careless charm. That memory became a map for my plan, each detail informing the next step. I imagined the wine in his glass like a mirror, reflecting everything he had done, everything he thought was hidden. And I promised myself that when the moment came, they would see it, feel it, and have no choice but to reckon with the truth. Not with screams or chaos, but with the undeniable weight of exposure. Every encounter became a chess move. I observed the timing of her texts, the way he lingered on the phone, the subtle ways they signaled to each other. Nothing escaped me. I stored it all. The casual brush of a hand, the faintest whisper, the lingering glance over a shoulder. Each tiny betrayal stacked like bricks, building a wall that would ultimately enclose them in the consequences they had. Thought they could evade, and I felt a strange exhilaration, knowing that the web I had woven was almost complete, ready to ensnare them both in a single inevitable moment. Yet, even with control, fear hovered at the edges of my mind. Fear of misstep, of timing gone wrong, of the delicate balance of patience shattered by one impulsive move. I reminded myself constantly, this was not just about revenge, it was about revelation. It was about forcing them to confront the truth of their own actions, to feel the exposure and humiliation that they had so carelessly imposed on me. And with that in mind, I waited, patient, poised, a silent storm gathering in the shadows of our lives. And then, just as the tension had been building to its peak, I saw it. The small, telling slip that revealed their arrogance, the way they assumed secrecy was infinite. In that instant, I knew the trap was set. The moment was mine. Everything they had hidden, every lie they had whispered, every betrayal they had thought inconsequential, was about to surface. The anticipation coiled, in my chest, sharp and electric, a reminder that the power of the betrayed is a force that cannot be ignored. And I smiled quietly, because soon, very soon, everything would come to light. By the time I began laying the groundwork for what I called my revelation, I had become almost invisible in plain sight. Friends and neighbors saw me smiling, calm, composed, unaware of the storm I carried within. But beneath that serene exterior, every thought, every heartbeat was focused on precision, timing, and the slow, inevitable exposure of their betrayal. I had learned that patience is not weakness. It is power waiting for the perfect instant to strike. I watched them carefully, noting patterns and habits I had once ignored. She laughed too brightly, he leaned too casually, and together they danced, in a careless rhythm, unaware of the quiet observer in their midst. I caught fleeting moments in the grocery store, in casual conversations, in the spaces where walls weren't soundproof. Small gestures that confirmed everything I had suspected for months. Each subtle revelation fed the growing fire inside me, sharp and cold at once. And yet, I never acted impulsively. Each step was measured, deliberate, like a pianist perfecting a complex composition. I began introducing tiny disruptions into their routine, subtle enough to avoid suspicion, yet enough to create cracks in their arrogance. A mislaid key here, a whispered comment there, the occasional raised eyebrow at precisely the wrong or right moment. They began to sense that something was off, though they couldn't pinpoint what. It was intoxicating, this quiet power. To watch them stumble over imagined threats, to feel the tension rise in their interactions, knowing the truth was only inches away from full exposure. It was more thrilling than I had ever imagined. Night, I sat in the dark, replaying memories, reviewing patterns, refining plans. The betrayal was no longer just emotional, it was tangible, a living thing that pulsed and breathed in our shared spaces. I traced it with my mind like a map, knowing where every crack lay, every weakness, every sign that would eventually reveal the full truth. And in those quiet hours, I imagined the final act. How their faces would shift when they realized that the one they had underestimated was already in command, orchestrating the entire performance of revelation. And still, even in the calculated calm, moments of anger and grief pierced through. I recalled whispered promises, the warmth of trust I had offered, and the sharp sting of their duplicity. Those memories were fuel, sharpening my mind, heightening my senses, making me more precise in observation, more ruthless in planning. Every laugh they shared, every glance they exchanged became a tiny spark I tucked away, ready to ignite when the time was right. The game was no longer about suspicion, it was about inevitability, and I intended to win. The deeper I went into their lives, the more their arrogance became my ally. They believed themselves untouchable, wrapped in secrecy and whispered assurances that no one was watching. How little they knew. Every careless smile, every fleeting touch, every joke shared in hushed tones became a piece of the narrative I was weaving. A story only I could tell, a truth that would one day leave them exposed, humiliated, and powerless. I had become the unseen hand guiding the narrative, subtle, invisible, in complete control. I began testing the edges of their confidence, leaving hints that I knew more than I should. A lingering look, a quiet laugh at a private joke, a casual remark meant to unsettle. They didn't realize they were walking a tightrope above a pit I had prepared, one misstep away from total exposure. I watched as small flickers of doubt crossed their faces, almost imperceptible but enough. Enough to thrill me, enough to remind me that patience was the sharpest weapon of all. Power, I realized, was in waiting. At the same time, I carefully preserved the appearance of innocence. Friends and family continued to see the same smiling wife, the same calm observer, unaware of the storm behind my eyes. But inside, I was calculating, tracing every movement, mapping every interaction, and imagining the perfect sequence of exposure. The thrill of anticipation coursed through me like electricity, every heartbeat in rhythm with the secret I carried. Each day brought me closer, every mistake they made a stepping stone toward revelation. And yet, beneath the strategy and control, there remained a tender wound, memories of the life I thought I had, the love I once believed in. I remembered mornings of laughter, the warmth of a hand held without betrayal, the soft words that had once promised forever. They haunted me, fleeting and sharp, reminding me that anger and grief were inseparable from justice. I learned to use them as fuel, turning sorrow into clarity, turning pain into the precision required to orchestrate the final act. Then came the subtle slip that confirmed the timing was near. She lingered too long on a conversation. He glanced with a mixture of guilt and arrogance, the tiniest tremor in their composure that revealed their hubris. I noticed it instantly, the way a hunter senses the prey's falter, and I smiled quietly. To myself, everything was in place, the stage was set, the game was nearly over, and soon, every hidden word, every secret glance, every lie would unravel under the weight of the truth I held in my hands. The final preparations were delicate, precise, and thrilling. Every move I made now carried weight. Every glance, every word, every step was part of the invisible web I had woven around them. They thought they controlled the narrative, but in truth, I was the director, unseen and unchallenged. I had watched their arrogance grow, nurtured by the assumption that no one was paying attention. And now, the very arrogance that had shielded them would become their undoing. I began to orchestrate situations, subtle traps that would reveal their duplicity without a single direct accusation. A casually forgotten note here, a misdelivered message there, whispers I allowed to float just within earshot. Each piece carefully placed, each reaction observed. They stumbled, unaware that I was already several steps ahead, a silent force, shaping the outcome of every interaction. The thrill of control, the intoxicating power of knowing and waiting, coursed through me like fire in my veins. And yet, there were moments when the human heart intruded, soft and painful. Memories of trust, of love, of evenings when laughter had been genuine, haunted me, twisting the satisfaction with a sharp edge of grief. Those memories were dangerous, but I turned them into fuel. Anger and sorrow were not weaknesses. They were the lenses through which I sharpened every observation, calculated every move, and strengthened my resolve to see the truth revealed fully and publicly. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the tiny telling slip that exposed the fragility of their confidence. She lingered too long in conversation. He faltered for a split second, and the mask they had worn for so long cracked just enough for me to see clearly. My pulse quickened, excitement coiling tightly in my chest. The inevitability of what was coming made the air around me electric, heavy with tension. Soon, every secret, every betrayal, every carefully hidden glance would be laid bare. They would have no escape. I sat quietly that night, imagining the unraveling, savoring the moment when the truth would strike like a hammer. The power of patience, the thrill of control, the satisfaction of inevitability, it all converged into a sharp, gleaming edge. And I knew, with a clarity that left me breathless, that nothing could stop what was coming. Every choice, every lie, every whisper of betrayal would be exposed, and I would stand witness to the revelation, calm, controlled, unshaken. The storm was ready to break, and when it did, it would leave nothing untouched. The night had arrived with all the subtlety of a predator's approach, silent, deliberate, and suffocating in its inevitability. I moved through the house, arranging every detail with precision, every object, every light, every table setting, a part of the stage for what was to come. The chandelier cast long shadows across the room, and I noticed the flicker in the polished silverware, the soft reflection in the wine glasses. Each element mattered. Every detail was a note in the symphony of revelation I had been composing for months. He arrived first, smiling that infuriating, oblivious smile, unaware that the evening would not go as he imagined. She followed, radiant and careless, lingering, at the doorway, unaware that she was stepping into a web designed entirely for them. I greeted them with warmth, masking every flicker of anticipation, every edge of calculation beneath a smile that betrayed nothing. Every movement was measured, every word carefully placed, every gesture designed to maintain the illusion of calm. The air hummed with tension, thick and electric, as though the room itself knew what was about to happen. The wine was poured with deliberate care, the scent rich and intoxicating, swirling in the glasses like liquid fire. I set the table, aware of how the reflections would catch the light, how shadows would fall across their faces, how every glance and every flicker of expression would be magnified. I noticed the way she adjusted her hair, the subtle tilt of his. Head and I cataloged it all in my mind. A silent witness to every careless signal. My heart thumped with anticipation. A slow, steady drumbeat that matched the rhythm of the night. And yet, beneath the careful orchestration, there was a tremor in my chest. A reminder that even the most precise plan is alive with unpredictability. The memory of their betrayal, the laughter I had once shared with him, the warmth that had been replaced by this simmering, tense silence, it all pressed against me, sharpening my focus and fueling the thrill of inevitability. I reminded myself, this was not just revenge, it was revelation. Every move, every glance, every carefully orchestrated moment would expose them completely, leaving no shadow for them to hide in. I could feel the tension building, a coiled energy that made my pulse quicken and my breath shallow. The dinner had begun, the wine was rich and fragrant, and the stage was set. Every instinct told me the moment was near, the moment when all the lies, all the secrets, all the betrayals would surface in a blaze of clarity, and I waited, patient, poised, and utterly in control, knowing that in this quiet, orchestrated chaos, the truth would finally strike. The evening unfolded like a slow-burning fuse, each moment building tension I could almost taste. I watched them carefully, noting the way he laughed too loudly, how she lingered on certain words, the subtle brush of fingers that had once belonged to me alone. Every motion, every glance, every whispered laugh was a thread in the web I had so carefully constructed. And they walked willingly into it, blind to the storm that had been waiting for months to strike. The wine flowed smoothly, deep red, almost hypnotic, and I poured it with an unshakable calm, masking the thrill that surged beneath my skin. I let my gaze linger just long enough on them to let doubt settle like a shadow, subtle and untraceable. They felt it without knowing why, their arrogance faltering in the faintest of tremors. That tremor, the tiniest crack in their confidence, was all I needed. I had learned over months that it was in these small slips that true power resides, in the quiet realization that someone sees through every lie. At one point, she reached for the breadbasket, her hand brushing his, and I felt my chest tighten, a mixture of rage and anticipation that left me dizzy. I smiled politely, acknowledging the gesture with nothing more than a nod, while inside, every nerve screamed with the delicious anticipation of what was to come. The room felt alive, every shadow, every reflection, every flicker of candlelight, charged with the electric pulse of inevitability. They could not see it yet, but the net had closed, and the threads I had laid over months were tightening around them, inch by inch. Memories assaulted me in fragments. Quiet mornings when trust had been sacred, laughter shared in corners of our home, whispers meant for each other alone. Those memories twisted sharply against the present, sharpening my resolve. I let them serve as fuel, igniting the precise, controlled fury that had been months in the making. My mind replayed each betrayal, each small act of deceit, until the full scale of their arrogance hit me with the force of a storm. And I knew, tonight, everything would become visible. By the time dessert arrived, tension had reached a tangible edge. The faint clatter of cutlery, the subdued hum of conversation, the soft flicker of candlelight, all were instruments in the symphony of exposure I had composed. I leaned slightly forward, a casual gesture, and felt the shiver of anticipation run through me. Soon, every lie, Every secret, every betrayal would crash down around them, undeniable, irreversible. And I would be there, calm and composed, the silent orchestrator of their reckoning, watching as the truth finally burned through the illusion they had so carelessly built. The moment arrived almost imperceptibly, a flicker in her expression, a hesitation in his laughter, the slightest tremor in their carefully maintained composure. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, heavy and expectant, as if the room knew what was about to unfold. I remained calm, smiling politely, moving through the motions of host and wife. But inside, the storm I had nurtured for months roared with the force of inevitability. It started with a glance, sharp and deliberate, catching both of them off guard. A subtle comment, a carefully chosen word, a tone that hinted at knowledge they assumed I didn't possess. Their smiles faltered for the first time, replaced by the faintest flicker of unease. My heart surged, a mixture of triumph and cold satisfaction, as I watched the carefully constructed facades begin to crack. The power of patience, of waiting for the perfect instant, revealed itself in the quiet devastation of their expressions. The wine glasses, the polished silver, the flickering candlelight, every detail I had orchestrated became part of the reveal. Their whispered jokes stuttered into silence, their casual touches recoiled into self-consciousness, and I could almost taste the tension thickening in the air. The months of observation, of careful cataloging, of subtle manipulation, all culminated in this precise moment. I let them sense my awareness without speaking, letting the weight of their secrets press down until the truth became impossible to ignore. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, there was a quiet pulse of emotion I could not deny. Grief for what we had once shared, sorrow for the love I had believed in, and rage at the arrogance that had allowed betrayal to flourish so long. Those emotions sharpened the moment, making the revelation burn brighter and linger longer. I was not cruel. I was just exacting the justice the betrayal demanded. I held my composure as the shock of realization dawned in their eyes, savoring every flicker of recognition, every subtle twitch of panic, every fragile facade shattering silently in front of me. By the end of the night, the dinner had transformed. From a casual social event into a quiet arena of reckoning, they would never forget the weight of that exposure, the sense that every hidden glance, every whispered secret, every careless betrayal had been observed, remembered, and poised for revelation. I remained calm, serene, a silent conductor of their unraveling, knowing the storm I had orchestrated had reached its crescendo. And as they sat there, stunned and speechless, I realized that control, patience, and the quiet accumulation of truth had achieved what anger alone never could. The inferno had begun, and I was at its center, untouchable, triumphant, and utterly unshaken. The morning after, the house felt strange, quiet in a way that carried the weight of what had unfolded the night before. The air smelled faintly of candle wax and wine, a residue of the tension that had finally been released. I moved through it slowly, deliberately, savoring the calm aftermath, knowing that the storm had passed, but the echoes of its power would linger long after. The betrayal had been exposed, the lies laid bare, and the fragile illusions they had built now lay in ruins. I watched them carefully from across the room as they fumbled in the residual awkwardness of recognition. Her usual arrogance had been replaced by uncertainty, his careless charm replaced by the faintest tremor of guilt. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of balance restored, tempered by the lingering sorrow of what had once been. There was no need for words. The truth had spoken loud enough, carrying weight far beyond what any argument or confrontation could achieve. I had orchestrated the revelation so that it could not be denied, could not be brushed aside, and I savored the undeniable precision of it all. Friends and neighbors began to sense something had shifted, subtle cues in their demeanor and expressions, signaling that the cracks in the facade were more than imagined. Rumors began to ripple through conversations, whispers of realization and sudden understanding, all fueled by the evidence they could no longer hide. And yet, I remained calm, invisible yet omnipresent in my observation, letting the narrative unfold as I had predicted. Patience, I reminded myself, had always been the key. The storm may have been silent, but it had been all-encompassing. Even as I observed the fallout, memories of what I had lost, the love I had once believed in, the trust shattered into fragments, surfaced with sharp clarity. I allowed myself a moment of grief, brief and necessary, before letting it harden into resolve. The betrayal had demanded acknowledgement, and acknowledgement had been delivered. But I was not cruel. I had acted with precision, not impulse, letting the power of truth replace anger and humiliation, leaving lessons that would be remembered long after the fire had cooled. And through it all, a quiet sense of liberation began to emerge. The weight I had carried, the suffocating tension of suspicion, the rage tempered by patience, the months of careful observation, began to lift. I could breathe again, lighter, freer, and acutely aware of the power that comes from enduring, observing, and ultimately revealing the truth. The ashes of their deceit lay around me, and in those ashes, I found a strange beauty, proof that patience, foresight, and unshakable composure could transform pain into clarity, betrayal into revelation, and rage into justice without a single word raised in anger. The days that followed carried a quiet intensity, like the residue of a storm that had passed, but left the air charged. People began to notice subtle shifts, hesitations in conversation, fleeting glances, the almost imperceptible weight of unspoken truths. I watched it all with a calm precision, savoring the echoes of exposure rippling outward. Their carefully constructed facades were crumbling, piece by piece, and the world was starting to see them for what they really were. I noticed the whispers in corners, the sideward glances from friends who had long suspected, but never dared, to speak. The satisfaction was not in vengeance alone, but in the inevitability of recognition. Months of careful observation, calculated restraint, and patient orchestration had led to this, a truth that could not be denied. And in that quiet unfolding, I allowed myself a moment to acknowledge the power I had harnessed, the control I had maintained, and the precision with which justice, emotional and social, had been delivered. Even in public, their discomfort was palpable. Every gesture, every smile, every word now carried the weight of past exposure. I walked among them seemingly untouched, calm, composed, the image of serenity. Yet beneath it all, I carried the quiet thrill of accomplishment, the understanding. That truth, observed and revealed with patience, wields a power that anger alone could never achieve. It was a victory not of chaos, but of measured, deliberate strategy, and it was sweet in its perfection. And yet, despite the triumph, I could not ignore the residual sorrow, the fragments of what had been, the quiet moments of love that had once been genuine. I allowed myself to feel them briefly, a nod to the humanity that still lingered beneath the armor of calculated vengeance. Those feelings sharpened the clarity of my purpose, reminding me that the journey had been necessary, that the storm, though devastating, had delivered lessons not just to them, but to me. I had endured, observed, and acted with precision, and in doing so, reclaimed the sense of agency that betrayal had stolen. The realization settled in fully. I had transformed pain into revelation, betrayal into understanding, and rage into justice. The world had witnessed the subtle unraveling, and the aftermath carried a resonance that would linger long after the immediate shock had faded. I was free now, not because of what had happened to them, but because of the control I had exercised, the clarity I had maintained, and the truth I had revealed without compromising the integrity of my own self. The final closure came quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the soft settling of dust after a storm. By now, they had learned that nothing could be hidden, that every glance, every whispered word, every hidden intention had been observed and catalogued. The tension that had once pulsed through every room like a live wire had faded, leaving only the lingering hum of consequence. I watched them navigate the new reality I had orchestrated, their confidence replaced by caution, their arrogance tempered by awareness. It was not triumph born of cruelty, but of inevitability. I had shown them that patience, observation, and the careful revelation of truth held far greater power than impulsive confrontation ever could. The world had seen them unravel, their duplicity laid bare without a single shout or public accusation. And in that calm aftermath, I felt an unfamiliar weight lift from my shoulders. The rage that had once burned so hotly had transformed into a quiet strength, a reminder that justice need not roar. It could whisper and still carry the force of inevitability. Even in the relief of victory, I reflected on the cost. The love I had once cherished, the trust that had been broken, the moments of innocence lost. They were the shadows beneath the light of triumph. But those shadows were also proof of my endurance, my patience, and my clarity of purpose. I had walked through fire without being consumed, observing, waiting, and acting only when the moment demanded perfection. And now, the ashes of betrayal lay before me, silent, revealing, and irrevocable. The applause, though not literal, came in quiet acknowledgments, in the subtle recognition from those who had witnessed the unraveling. It came in the small, fleeting moments when justice, served with precision and patience, left no doubt of its hand. I allowed myself to breathe fully for the first time in months, the weight of vigilance finally easing. There was a strange beauty in the calm, in the aftermath of revelation, in the knowledge that I had endured, observed, and acted with unwavering clarity. And so, as I sat in the quiet of my own space, the world outside moving with indifferent rhythm, I felt a sense of closure I had never thought possible. The storm had passed. The lies had been revealed. The betrayal had been acknowledged. And I remained, calm, composed, triumphant not in chaos or fury, but in the deliberate, quiet, undeniable power of truth. In the ashes of their deception, I had found my own strength, my own liberation, and a profound understanding that patience, observation, and the courage to act decisively are the truest forms of justice, leaving echoes that no betrayal can ever erase.